ever actually have deer in the yard? Okay, 100%. Not surprised. Any place where the water runs, the railroad tracks run, you are going to have a highway for deer. It's kind of the way it works. Fortunately, our cousins in the northern peninsula are extremely adept at doing deer proofing, partly because they have to. Because unlike us, where the deer have sort of migrated in because we've migrated out, they have had it to deal with it all the time and all along. Now the problems with deer, now for those of you who didn't get the memo, my name is Beckey. They actually put my last name on here, which was really surprising, because normally they don't. I've got some heads nodding from people who've been here before. Thing about the deer, except for the highest part of the summer months when food is at a, there's lots of it, we have almost year-round damage from deer. Spring, winter, even the fall, because they're storing it up to get them through the winter, we're going to get deer damage. So, you obviously have to protect your plants some way, and there are ways to do it. And what works in the summer is not always going to work in the winter. Now up north, in the farms, you notice they don't do necessarily a whole lot, but the garden plots behind people's houses will have these ginormous fences. Unfortunately, in places like Birmingham and in Bloomfield, and to a lesser extent Troy and Sterling Heights, they won't let you put up a 10-foot tall deer fence. Now keep in mind, you'll read on the internet, they'll say 8 feet. 8 feet works if the deer aren't A, terribly hungry here in Michigan, or you're in the South. And the reason being is deer in the South are about yay tall. They're short little goobers. There's lots of them, but they're short at the shoulder, which is how you measure deer and horses and things. Our deer are almost 4 feet tall at the shoulder. They're almost a foot taller than the ones you'll see in the South. So your options are things like mechanical, we're talking fencing, we're talking deer-resistant plants, we're talking scent-based stuff and making things taste bad. And then there's some other more really high-tech stuff, which I'll get into, which are your electronic solutions, and it's gotten real technical. Didn't used to be. Now, under options, the mechanical stuff, your fencing. Fencing's year-round, but it ain't pretty. In the summer, though, and even you can actually use netting. Okay, it does work. Particularly, if you're just trying to screen off an area. It does help with the gardens. The deer won't generally push through it if it's on something that the posts are nice and secure. They generally don't like to. And the cool thing about this is you can do stuff like this, which are little scented rags that you can put on those screens that the deer don't like. This screens also let you do things like you'll read where they say use human hair. Because yep, they'll tell you, see if you can bug your barber for hair. But because deer are kind of scared of us, and the reason is, although it's kind of silly and it might not sound like it's important, it's the placement of our eyes. We have forward-facing vision like the predators do. Your coyotes, your wolves, all those kind of things, their eyes face forward like ours do. We look like a predator even if we can't catch them. So, the scent of humans, generally speaking, will work. This is one of the reasons some places will tell you use human urine and put that on a rag and or spread it out in the garden. It doesn't hurt the plants, and the deer don't like it. Personally, I can't get, that kind of squicks me out a bit. I can't quite do that, I'll be honest, but apparently it does work. this is also the premise behind where you'll read reports where they'll say, use Milorganite. But on the winter stuff, this will work reasonably well. In the winter, burlap is your buddy. Because if you've got arborvitae and the deer haven't been chewing on it during the summer, it's one of the few things that's up, green, and soft that the deer will eat in the winter. Bottom 4 feet, maybe even as high as 5 feet, needs to be wrapped to keep the deer from chewing it apart. Same thing can be said for burning bush. The deer damage on burning bush, if you ever see one where it's all beat up on the bottom side and then it's nice and lush above the 5-foot height, 90% of the time that's deer damage, which is unlike bad pruning, which looks similar. So, like I said, the other one, well, actually, you're motion activated, you're later. So those are your mechanical options. Fencing goes nearly invisible fencing. And then for the winter, burlap. Now, all of the scent-based stuff that I've got here, which includes the Repellents and the granular plant skid and the granular form of liquid fence, and the go-away deer and rabbit repellent, they don't work in the winter. We've got snow. And the wet always generally knocks that stuff back enough that it's not a real option, which is why you got to go back to your fencing. And then, well, I've got those 2 handouts I gave you guys about your deer-resistant plants. Generally speaking, anything with a particularly coarse texture, a heavy scent, are on the deer's not really favorite food list. Okay, and I've given you a couple, like I said, a couple pages of things that the deer aren't real thrilled about. And you'll notice these are a lot of plants, some of which you're not really familiar with. Boxwood, they don't like the smell of. I don't blame them. They're saying the false cypress, the hinoki cypress. This one is, if they're not short on food, they're not going to go for it. If they're short on food, your hinoki cypresses are not necessarily going to be deer resistant. I can tell you right now. Privet, on the other hand, world's greatest hedge, been around for centuries. Deer don't like it. I'm good with that. The western arborvitae, the green giants like we've got along the back fence that make a great screen, deer aren't real thrilled with that. It's got that nice heavy coarse texture that they don't like, unlike our native eastern arborvitae, which are your emerald greens, which they think are tasty. And there's a bunch of other things in here. You know, generally they won't go after the Japanese maples, but I've had people say, no, the deer are doing that. Japanese maples have a different problem with deer damage, which is they're low to the ground for the most part, and they're kind of bendy. So when the deer's antlers are all rough, and they want to get the fur off of them in the fall, they make a great spot to rub their heads. And that's the time of year you might in the fall, you might actually want to put something around the Japanese maples if you've had this problem before. And that's any small new tree. If it's young and it's bendy, and it's less than about 6 feet tall, the deer are going to use it as a buck rub. The males are. So this is one of those times where you're going to want to protect your trees. This is, you'll see, put 2 or 3 posts up of basically 2 by 2 fence, goes 8-foot tall pieces of wood, and take what they call metal fabric, which is the heavyweight metal fencing that you can use for bunnies to keep them out, and put that around the trees at about 1.5 to 2 feet out. That'll keep them from getting close enough to actually shove the sticks over and actually damage your tree. Okay. Anyway, but generally speaking, this one and the one on perennials, candy tuft, black-eyed Susans, bleeding hearts, they don't like the flavor of them. They're going to pretty much ignore them even in the summer months. Euphorbia is kind of a cool plant. It has very unusual flowers, but the sap is basically very much like latex. And it goes, it's not really fun when you get it on you, and it's even less fun when the deer get it on their tongue. It's partly why they go, bleh, and they won't eat it. Which is not to say that deer, particularly baby deer, won't nibble on everything. Now, one way to tell deer damage, barring actually seeing them chow down on something, is what it looks like. If it's ragged, okay, it's deer damage. Bunnies and woodchucks will cut with those nice hard teeth they've got, and they'll shear things off at about a 45-degree angle. This is how you can pick your culprits and defend it accordingly. Yes, sir?
I noticed that the flowers in my yard were cut off a foot and a half, where it wouldn't be a squirrel or a rabbit, because it can't get that high.
Because you've never seen a bunny stretch. Bunnies will get things 3 feet up.
Yeah.
Okay, woodchuck might not, but bunny can get a 3
They
foot.
would trample it down first.
No, bunnies are very strong. They'll stand up on their hind legs to get the flower tops. They can get 3 foot tall plants. I've watched them do it. And some of your bunnies, your baby bunnies are little. Your adult bunnies stand about this tall, standing up on their back legs and then posting up. Your bunny can get up there. If you got jackrabbits, they're up here. Off of the table, mind you, not off of the floor. Because then we start getting into Harvey the Rabbit, and that gets weird. Anyway, so deer-resistant plants. There's lots of them. They're pretty. You can do wonderful things with them. You can intermix them with some of the stuff that's more vulnerable, for lack of a better word. And that's what things like all of this stuff back here behind me is all about. Now, scent, because we'll go on to the scent-based stuff. Now, you've seen all of this stuff back there. Actually, you should have come over here because all my liquid stuff was supposed to be over here. We're actually out of the liquid version of liquid fence right now, but it does work. Most of these are based on plant oils, hot pepper, capsaicin in some form, and egg solids, preferably rotted egg solids, okay? Which is why when you put some of this stuff down, it's pretty stinky, even to human noses. But after a couple days, we don't smell it anymore because we haven't got the best sniffers on the planet, and the deer can still smell it. And if it smelled bad to us, it really smells bad to them. So they do work. The I Must Garden stuff is actually kind of interesting. They've got 2 different formulas, one for the growing season in the spring, which is stronger, and then one for the season long, which is the one in the red can. And the formulas are a little bit different. One is more spicy oils. The other one is, I think this is the one with the egg solids in it. Yep, this is the one with the egg solids in it. And some of the plants you'll see in there are ones that you will see as the resistant plants, allium. And you'll see garlic oil in a lot of these mixtures. Garlic is an allium. All of the alliums are your garlics, your onions, and your chives. And those are all things that deer are just like, nope, sorry, don't want to eat it. On the other hand, you've got things that they don't smell good and they don't taste good, okay? Hot pepper wax is the other one. Anything with capsaicin in it is under the, oh my God, you did what to my tongue? But deer are individual, much like people. What works for most of them may not work on all of them, which is why sometimes you wind up having to swap this stuff out. And after a while, if you're a kid, when you were little, you hated Brussels sprouts. As an adult, you either like them or you tolerate them. Deer can do the same thing. They can get used to a flavor, and sometimes you have to switch it out to something else that also tastes awful. So they remember in their little deer brains, this is an icky thing and I don't want it. Now you get stuff like the plant skid and the granulars. They have some of the same things in them. Plant skid is a little bit better in some respects in that its magic ingredient is cow's blood. Okay? It holds around longer, but the deer sense something has died. And they don't like to be where predators are. And for something to die, there had to have been a predator to shed blood. So it works pretty effectively. It tends to hang around a little bit longer than some other scents do, and some other things. The granular in particular works pretty well for this. The liquid can be sprayed on the plants. You can also use some of these around the flower beds before the deer actually get to the plants themselves. I tend to think that if they've already nibbled on something, give them something bad to taste. If you're putting in something new that you think might be vulnerable, go ahead and spray the plants with some of the liquid stuff so that the first nibble they get out of that new plant is, ew, I don't want this. So they learn in their little deer brains that this is not something desirable. If you get them to where they eat it and it was tasty and then it isn't tasty the next time, they're more likely to remember that first taste than the second one. So this is my recommendation. If you're going to use any of those scent or taste-based products, particularly the taste-based ones, put it out immediately when you put the plants out. Now, in weather like this, where it's 85 degrees, during the day, I might tell you, wait until night to put the stuff down, because anytime you put a chemical on a plant and it's above 80 degrees, the plants will absorb it entirely too fast, and you get leaf burn, and you get plant damage. And for a new planting, that's bad. It's not great for the older stuff, but it's really bad for the new stuff. So we don't like to do that. Then humans got clever, okay? Scent stuff is awesome. The I Must Garden stuff was created by a woman who moved out to Pennsylvania, where their deer population is actually more ridiculous than ours is. And she wanted to keep a lovely garden, and she had to find a way to repel her deer. And she worked on it for like 10, 15 years, coming up with various formulas until she found magic combinations that worked for her deer. And then she started marketing it. One of the first things they came up with on the electronic devices was this. They took our fabulous motion sensing that we use on our porch lights to, flash the lights on our garages so we can get in our house at night and hopefully deter some would-be thieves. They applied it to this. They put a motion sensor in it, they hooked it up to a hose, and this thing will spray water about 20 feet to hit a deer. And it sends them out in jets and little pulses, well, not little pulses, fairly big ones, to actually hit the deer. But the deer don't know where they're getting hit from or what's attacking them, but something is, and deer are easily startled. So it tends to deter them. My recommendation, if you are going to use something like this, move it around. If they figure out where the pattern is, they'll avoid that. And eventually they can actually get used to it. So if you move it around the yard a bit, what's going to happen is they're going to get hit from different angles and they aren't going to know what to do with it. On the other hand, some of the other ones, and here's why I have my handy dandy little list, there's some other ones that are going on. Ow, I forgot. On the taste one, which this is something that only came out a couple years ago, this is something called repellents. Now, we talk about systemics as far as killing your bugs. This is a systemic for your plant. It makes it taste nasty. So we're talking about spraying stuff on them. This is one way to get it absorbed into the plant itself and to make it taste nasty to the deer. So this also works, it's also supposed to work for the rabbits and the groundhogs. And boy, do we have both. And it's designed for your ornamentals, so your trees, your shrubs, your perennials, whatever. This is one way to do it. It's called Repellex, R-E-P-E-L-L-E-X. But that one's relatively recent. I think we've only had it 2 years, and it's only been out about that long. Fortunately, I have a kitty, and he is a mighty hunter, and I generally don't have the bunnies in my yard. They stay away because he chases them. which doesn't bother me. And if he gets, you know, if he actually catches one and the bunny beats him up, well, he'll learn better. Because if you've never seen it, look up bunny versus snake on the internet. Bunnies are not the soft, gentle little creatures everybody believes them to be. They can fight, and they're mean, and they have very sharp teeth. Under the mechanical and electronic ones, there's one called Gardener, as in G-U-A-R-D-E-N-E-R. We don't sell these, but we do have the Scarecrow, which works. Most of these are motion detection devices. Some of them will give off ultrasonic sounds. Some of them will flash bright lights at the deer, which may or may not work for you in the city. And you can change the range at which it works and on the Gardener by a little sensitivity knob. So if you've got a garden where you've planted, let's say, clover and fun things like that out at the edge of your yard, if your property's big enough so that the deer want to go there and you protect the rest of the yard, cool. You can actually set it to a range of anywhere from 5 to 25 feet. There is wireless deer fencing. And this is kind of interesting because the wireless deer fence, you set up posts, and if you put a scent in them that the deer like, and they put their nose up to it, and it goes zap, and it gives them a static shock, which actually is supposed to be less than your typical, you know, run your fingers over it and poke the balloon and get a static charge. It actually is supposed to be less than that, but they have very sensitive noses. The wireless deer fence is run by AA batteries. Have a Heart has a version of it. There's a thing called the Yard Sentinel. It is motion detection. It's the one with the bright strobe lights. It actually makes a noise if you want it to that is human audible. And it also has ultrasonic noises that only the animals can hear. And that one actually has settings for both deer, rabbits, cats, and I think dogs, if I remember rightly. Then there's Scarecrow. There is one where there is an electronic lure, and this works awesome in a way because it is solar powered, so it works much like the Gardener. It works a lot like the wireless deer fence in that it has an attractant and it gives them the electrical shock, but you don't have to run wires to make it work, and you don't have to remember to replace the batteries either, which works nicely. There is one called Deer Chaser, which is a motion sensor, LED bright lights, ultrasonic sound. And there's actually one that uses liquid propane gas cannons. But they're pretty much suggesting that for Deer Chaser, or the one called Scare Wars, but they're pretty much suggesting that one be used commercially, because it doesn't make sense in it with the audible noises and stuff like that in a residential zone. And some of these are not cheap. I did look at the price. I think it's probably a giant puff of air, but I could be wrong.
How was that a grapevine where they grew grapes for wine?
Mm-hmm.
They had these things where the bomb went off.
Yeah, that's probably what they're using, is the Scare Wars. It sounds like cannon shot, but there's no actual.
I'm guessing it was like maybe gas on it.
Yep, it's gas instead of liquid propane. Yeah, it's probably what they were using, a version of a commercial scale version of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
big farm of grapes.
Yep. There's also one called Critter Blaster Pro, but it's actually one designed really for areas like vineyards and large scale operations. I suppose if you had, you know, a full 5 acres of property, you could use it and your neighbors wouldn't hate you for it. But I don't think in Royal Oak you wouldn't get cited for noise issues, and that would be bad. I'm not recommending anybody do anything that gets them tickets. Thus, you know, the temptation to use BB guns on the deer, I don't recommend, because God knows you could hit the neighbor kid. Yes, ma'am. they're getting them at their softest point, which is as a bud, right? And it's also got the highest quantity of sugar. And that, so it's the highest it's the point at which the flower is highest in its caloric content.
Okay. That's what we wonder, because the plants are loaded with buds, and when it comes to the flowers,
Yeah, it goes. That's where I would add. That's where I would probably spray the buds. Just so when they start nibbling,
they
it's
don't eat Shasta daisies, they won't touch those.
it's just goes. See, I suspect what that is. The difference between the daisies and the black-eyed Susans is they can smell something we can't, and the daisies don't smell as tasty. But the black-eyed Susans haven't opened fully enough that the scent they may release that keeps them from being eaten is there. And that's why your petunias, which rebloom and they're nice and soft and wonderful, the deer think are great. Because it's lots and lots of sugar, small area. And so, yeah, that's partly why annuals get hit somewhat more hard than, and that's bunnies and deer both. That's why they get hit harder, is they're constantly putting up new blossoms, constantly pulling sugar and putting it into the system to rebloom, and that makes them very desirable, both for the deer and, unfortunately, us, because we want our flowers. Anybody else have a question?
Do they like dandelions?
Truthfully, if it's green and it's available, they'll probably eat it, but I'm not entirely certain there's a preference for it.
You can eat the leaves, but I don't know.
Well, they probably would eat the entire plant, because, truth be told, I don't think they avoid the dandelions.
Okay.
I mean, come on, we make wine out of it. And that includes the flowers, by the way.
Some cayenne peppers and stuff. And I don't know if the deer eat them, but the squirrels like biting off the pepper and walking about 2 feet and then spitting it out.
Yeah, because they got to the...
Then they get burnt. I guess they don't get burnt when they're chewing it off the plant, but as soon as they realize it.
Yep.
But they keep coming back. I don't know if it's because there's so many squirrels.
Partly.
The one that got burnt last week is not the guy's friend.
Well, they don't talk. The thing is, squirrels don't have squirrely conversations. They chatter at you. They'll tell you, look out, human, look out, human, look out, human. But yeah, that's about the extent of their conversational range. Yeah, the only animals besides people that like capsaicin are parrots. Parrots are, in the wild, the ones that actually eat peppers like it's candy and then go, deliver the seeds elsewhere. That is actually one of their natural foods.
Is that like a pepper you can buy here?
Oh, yeah, you could, I mean, they'll eat ghost peppers if you let them. And jalapenos they think are candy. My girlfriend, she has parrots. She gives the parrots, hot peppers as treats because that's a native food. But most everything else is like, oh no, ow, 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 ow. Yeah, which is why when they start actually trying to nibble on it, they're like, oh no, sorry, don't want, and they drop. Same thing with the bunnies, truthfully. But yeah, squirrels, actually I didn't bring it up, but you could use the Repellzol for that. And we've got some squirrel stuff too that's specific.
Bird seed website that had hot pepper sunflower seeds.
Yep.
Because the birds can't taste it, I guess, but the squirrels can.
Correct. Most of our local birds are not going to taste capsaicin, which is why you could spray your black-eyed Susans and then leave the heads up, and the goldfinch won't care, and they'll still eat your seed heads for you. On the other hand, like I said, parrots, they can taste it, but they think it's sweet.
Is capsaicin just the hot part of the pepper?
Capsaicin is the hot part of a pepper. It's when they start talking about heat units for peppers, that's actually what they're talking about in part, is the amount of capsaicin.
And most of it's in the seeds
Not necessarily.
and like veins inside.
It depends on the pepper. Ghost peppers, the whole thing is, pretty much 100%, plus a little bit of water to give it structure, I think. Yeah, but in general. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you.
The like the little scented things, would they work if you just like put them around the perimeter of the garden? Or do they actually have to go onto every single?
You most of them will say you can use them at goes at the edge of flower beds as well as on. Plant Skid very specifically tells you how much to apply and at what distance from a garden bed and how wide a space. Most of them will, but a lot of them are, you know, also tell you direct apply.
So if it's a certain distance, what about when the lawn is mowed? Does it get into the dirt or does it stay on the grass? Is it something that you have to reapply every time you mow the lawn, or?
Okay, the question was with the scent-based and taste-based stuff, if you have to reapply it every time you mow the lawn. The granular, probably not. And probably not even the liquid stuff, although it will reduce the efficacy somewhat.
How about rain?
Rain, most of them will tell you to reapply at least on the plants. It goes after a rain or 1 or 2 rainfalls.
And regular watering?
Watering usually doesn't drain it out that fast, but usually a good hard rain, yeah, you're going to have to do it and reapply. The granular stuff tends to stick around longer. Depending on product, 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes 10 if you don't have a lot of pressure as far as animals coming and chowing down on things in your yard. You know, having been as dry as it was for like those 3 weeks, that probably extended the life of whatever people put out, you know, by that entire distance. In addition to it, but most of the stuff you're replacing somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks, depending on the product. And the liquid stuff tends to seem to not stick around quite as long as the granular, as in general. Yes, ma'am. The lady in the teal top in the back. Yeah.
No, so annuals, there aren't any recommended annuals that, I could try the marigold one, but every 12 years,
Well, okay, where is it? Come here, list. There are some, and I don't know why we didn't have a list for this, but okay. I will list some annuals for you. Yeah, Ageratum, Alyssum, Begonias, Celosia, Bachelor Buttons, Cleome, Dahlias, Dusty Miller. Somebody's got Forget-Me-Lots listed as an annual. They're not. Geraniums, Heliotrope, but again, that's a nice heavy scented thing, and I suspect it gets in their nose and they're like, whoa. Lobelia, Morning Glories, well, that explains that. Nasturtiums, Parsley. They're saying petunias, but I know better. Poppies. Okay, yeah. I'm coming up with perennials now. Zinnias, Snapdragons, and Stock. Yeah, they've got the annuals and the perennials on this list all goobered up. Well, I'm looking at, well, maybe in the south it's perennial. But somebody's got marigolds listed under the perennials, and I'm like, yeah, no, I don't think so. So, anything else? There was somebody else who had a question. Yes, sir?
Beckey, you've got Milorganite over there, Milwaukee sewage.
Yep.
But you didn't say anything about it. I mean,
Well,
I've used that for years with George's formula
yep.
in terms of the lawn. But does that have the same impact, only a third of the price of the granulated plant skid?
The plant skid is going to last longer, but the Milorganite as a general fertilizer, and it does work. Yeah. Plant skid tends to hang out longer, but the Milorganite absolutely as I mentioned it briefly and then I didn't get back to it. Milorganite is processed human sewage. It's been around since about 1920. Yeah, I'm trying to remember if it's 21 or 27. And they've changed how they've processed sewage, but the end product remains a good source of non-burning fertilizer for your plants. And it does, as I said, with human urine and the rest of it, it does work to repel the deer. I suspect the scent wears off sooner than the plant skid does. But yeah, you could use it, and as I said, it's non-burning. And it works for perennials just as well as it does for the grass. Yes, sir?
Does anything have to be worried about if you put it on a vegetable?
Nope. That's the cool thing, is any of this stuff can be put on veggies. Well, I wouldn't do it with that, but all of the taste and stuff, all you gotta do is wash the veggies. You can use it on any vegetable plant. It won't slow it down at all.
It doesn't soak in and make the vegetable taste bad?
Not usually, no. I have never had somebody come back and say, ew, it made my veggies taste bad. So a thorough washing is all it takes. It doesn't really penetrate into the plant. The only one I don't know anything about on that is the repellents. This is the only one I don't know about results on veggies on. I'm gonna have to do a bit more research on that one. But I suspect for like your arborvitae and let's say, what other things? Hydrangeas and that kind of thing, where it doesn't matter, because it would be perfectly usable. Because unfortunately, for those of you who grow hydrangeas, as I'm sure you've discovered, deer love them. They think they're tasty. And so to protect them, I would probably go with repellents and throw something like the Milorganite or the plant skid down if I wanted to grow hydrangeas in deer country. Because that'd be about the only way to keep the deer off of them. Anyone else with a question for me? Oh. Yes, ma'am.
I didn't hear you say that any of the products use animal urine, but I had heard that there were some deer-related products that did, and people were saying that they might be coming from factory farms and all that, stuff like that, or fur-bearing farms or whatever. So, do either use animal urine?
None of the ones I've got up here. I mean, we do sell coyote urine, and we do sell fox urine, and I'm sure the fox urine is coming from fox farms. On the other hand, I'm not entirely sure how you'd catch coyote. I suspect they may be collecting it from zoos, which would not be actually be a bad way to do it, because they're going to be there anyway, and you might as well make use of it and get the zoo in question a little bit of money to help support themselves. But yeah, I mean, the fox urine is definitely going to be from fox fur farms. There's just no other real way to do that. Not that we don't have native foxes, and for small critter control, it's actually pretty good. So is the coyote urine. Coyote urine does work for deer. In that in the winter, the coyotes, because if they're hungry enough, will group up. Normally they're pretty solitary, but in winter, or if it's a lean season otherwise, coyotes will group up to hunt down deer. So they do that. It's kind of a habit. But generally they're a solo critter. Yes, ma'am. You just, yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you put your hand up for me. Okay. Like I said, some people like to feed deer, and this is kind of a bugaboo on of mine personally. Please do not feed the deer. It gets them too used to people, but they are wild animals. They do startle, and a frightened deer is dangerous. Because deer can and do fight off wolves. They're perfectly capable of it. Their hooves are very sharp. And so you want to not encourage them to interact with people.
We have a place up north, and we have as many as 14 deer through the yard. A neighbor over this way feeds them. I see her go out in the morning and dump her whatever she dumps. And then we're on a court, so they just make a circle to the other neighbor that feeds them. And as you say, they can be dangerous because they come through the backyard, they get into a fight with their butts and their hoofs. That's what you call them. we can bring the outside in, but
Sure.
I don't like the idea of a neighbor feeding them, but you can't say anything, that's my property.
You can't, like I said, it's not a great idea.
Right.
And you've reduced their natural fear of humans, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
And they're not afraid. When I can open up the front door and go out on the deck and they stand there and look at me.
Yeah, and
They
that's,
come for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah.
They know exactly what they want, the oriental lilies or day lilies.
yeah.
And I refer to them as the three meals.
Yeah, I mean, they're herbivores. If it's green, it's edible as far as they're concerned. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of gardens become, as you say, a smorgasbord. And it's like, you know, eat at the one neighbor's house for breakfast because she feeds you, go to the neighbor who doesn't feed you for lunch, and go to the other folks on the other side who feed them for dinner. So, yeah, that's it. They can be very dangerous. There are, unfortunately, pictures of people, you know, being stomped by deer. Now, you might get out of it if you're lucky and the deer's not seriously, you know, afraid or anything, but it's been known to happen. And you know, like I said, they've got sharp hooves. And antler in the rut, when it's, you know, every male for every female he can get interested in him, they're aggressive.
So how do you suggest one try to shoo them away?
Well, that's partly what the scarecrows are for.
Oh, okay, but if
Don't try to shoo them away as a person. Just don't. I mean, I suppose if you took, because the thing is, if you try stomping, that's something, you know, to try to scare them like you might a dog. That's a challenge for a deer, because, you know, the bucks will put a foot down and drag their foot back, and that's the signal for a charge. You know, if a deer drops its head and pulls that foot back, get out of the way, because it's about to go. Now, it may turn around and run, which is fine, but it also may go for you. And you know, mama deers and babies, yeah, they'll try to run, but if they can't run, yeah, it's not a great idea.
Would maybe a bunch of cans on a string that they would trip over, scare them away, or?
See, I mean, it's an idea. A lot of times one of the options that people have suggested is putting out like fish line at chest level, because they're running into something they can't see,
Yeah.
and that spooks them. And that may work.
Would hanging tin cans on the fish line help, or does it just?
Well, then they can see it.
But the sound, I was trying to. something
Possibly.
Maybe.
I mean, you could try it, because a lot of people have done a lot of interesting things. I mean, like I said, people said, okay, let's see if I put out human urine, and oh yeah, okay, it worked.
Like, I would think like a scarecrow of a human wouldn't work, because
It doesn't move.
people don't do anything.
Well,
They're just used to people now.
they're getting used to people, yeah. And the other thing is that it doesn't move. Deer track movement. This is why hunters can successfully get them. Is the deer sees you, you hold still, the deer doesn't see you move, it puts its head down to browse, you move, deer catches the movement out of those, you know, they've got those wide-spaced eyes, so they can have great peripheral vision, although their vision up front's not so wonderful. And then you stop, and they calm down, and they put their heads back down, and then, you know, that's when you goes, hopefully you're in position at that point in a good space to actually shoot them. But they track motion. They're actually colorblind. And the other thing that they're really good at is smelling, which is why all the scent-based products is you're trying to, you know, get that nose of theirs and offend it greatly so that they don't want to come back. But those are their two primary senses. Vision is one of them, but their hearing is excellent also. But really the vision is actually the poorest part, except for tracking motion. Because that's also what the ears do, which is why the ultrasonic noise makers work pretty well. It's actually quite offensive to them. I'm trying to remember, one of the ones I read about actually puts out distressed animal noises, as though they've been attacked by another predator. And that's how they use it to get them away. Are we all set?